I'm the guy who turned Bob Dylan onto his first joint, and Bob Dylan was the guy who turned on the Beatles. That much is true, pretty true.
Can you tell us the story of turning Bob Dylan?
I want to hear that story.
Which story?
When you just got there.
Okay. So I came back to Minneapolis before I went to San Francisco. I should be looking at the camera. I'd been on this kibbutz for a couple of years, a communal, and this is while Israel was still, before they took the West Bank, it was still kind of socialist, before it went around. There were still the seeds of the seeds of its possible decay, but the right wing was isolated. The people who are now in power so many years now, it was still Ben-Gurion, still kind of a socialist, but the kibbutzim were a major thing. The collective farms, the communal farms, where everybody ate together. The children had their own place. It was everything was collective. You could get you could get a carton of cigarettes and I think 6 ounce. But anyway, so I came back with that experience. I went to Paris. I went to Paris where I encountered there was William Burroughs and the Beats, the people I had left behind were now in Paris. So we hung out. Then I went to New York to Greenwich Village. And there was the rise of a new brand of folkies, Dave Von Ronk, Fred Neil, people who weren't just folk who played music for propaganda for the Communist Party, left-wing hootenannies and Jewish progressives, but were down in the other, living it. And so I hung out with them. And then I got back to Minneapolis. And Dinkytown is the Bohemian neighborhood, so that's not sure where it was. Anyway, and soon I had a girlfriend from Bennington, a dancer, and we had a house, and and a kid who was now in her 50s. And my living room became the room of things happening, because everybody was hanging out. One of the biographies of Bob Dylan says that I had cheap Mexican marijuana at a time that it was a rarity in college campuses. This is right by the University of Minnesota. And so all these musicians are there, the first generation of white boys playing the blues, little son Tony Glover, Snake Dave Ray playing 12-string. These are like teenagers, or just after teenagers, supposed to be going to school, but in fact we had our own school, Higher Learning, Get High and Learn. And Spider John Kerner, and they were like channeling these old blues guys who were dying out. I mean, they were now in their 70s, like Son House and Robert Johnson. They were playing that music, and Big Bill Bronzy playing that music, but they're white guys, teenagers. But they were really so they'd be sitting around playing. And also the New Left was there. It was the beginning of the New Left, the beginning of the Cuban Revolution that had a powerful effect on us. We believed that it was true, or later we got disabused, but anyway, all this enthusiasm was happening. Fair play for Cuba, that's where the Cuban invasion of Cuba, all that was happening. And then Bonnie Beecher and all the Bohemians, so it was 24/7, it was 24-hour party time, but conversation. And I'd be telling them about experiences, read like I do, talking about books I suggest people read and so on, and just doing my dance there. And we had all these old blues records, and so this kid, Bonnie Beecher, who every time brings this kid by with his guitar, and he takes out his guitar and he's listening, and he's just playing around, and he's 18 years old, just down from Hibbing, Minnesota, where the wind sits on and his name was Bobby Zimmerman, where the wind hits heavy, and he'd never encountered anything like this. And somebody's in those days they had it was Mexican marijuana, so somebody's had a shoebox that's constantly cleaning it and rolling joints and passing them out. And we had a keg of beer. This was constant. And they're playing, and we're playing music, old folkies, folklore records, Dust Bowl Refugee, Woody Guthrie, and so on. So I said to him, and so he's around, he said, could I stay on your couch? He said, he'd been put on this nice Jewish boy, but he knew he had something else going on, put in this Jewish fraternity by his parents, who sold the stoves, the refrigerators to the miners up on the Mesabi Range. There was just a Jewish families up there doing that kind of thing in those towns, Duluth, Hibbing, Virginia, and so on. So he's down to go to school, but he found a different kind of school. So he moves, and he always had his guitar in his hand playing. So I said, hey, Bob, I want you to read this. And it was Woody Guthrie's autobiography, Bound for Glory. And in his autobiography, you can find it in Dylan's autobiography, Chronicles. If you Google Dave Whitaker, Bob Dylan, there's a lot there. But anyway, So, anywho, so I get up in the morning, and he's just finished he's reading it. And in his autobiography, Chronicles, he said, Dave Whitaker, he calls me the Beat Svengali for some reason. The Beat Svengali.
Right
What?
what it says right here.
The Beat Svengali gave me a book, and that book changed my life. I sat down one person and got up another. Is that right?
That's exactly what it says.
So like that. I got one person got up, and I guess the person he sat down, I didn't realize until pretty recently that the person he said he sat down was this nice Jewish boy, Bobby Zimmerman, and who he stood up as was Bob Dylan. Right there in my living room. It happened. So he's hanging out, we're all hanging out, he's playing music, and everybody's doing it. He says, well, not so long after, maybe a night or two later, he says, I got to try. And he said in the book, it says, not only that, Dave Whitaker told me he was still alive. And he said, I couldn't believe it, still alive, where he could be found. In his book, he said, somewhere on the West Coast, on the East Coast, but I knew exactly where he could be found in Greystone Mental Hospital, this enormous state mental hospital in this very state. We're sitting in New Jersey. It was like the mental hospital for New York City, in New Jersey. And so let's call him. So we call him. We got as far as the ward. It's long before any of this technology. And the older, the orderly. This is like a huge, with 100 dozens of wards, like a huge warehouse for people dying and mentally ill. This is before medication. Once you got schizophrenic, you are out. Anyway, and he's dying of his disease called Huntington's cholera, which slowly consumes your mind, all your nerves, anyway. And then he said, you can't come to bed. He's paralyzed. What are you talking about? And so Bob says, I got to go see him. So we take him out on the highway. And I look behind. I remember I can still see that. Here's this little guy. He's just a little skinny guy. He's 18 years old with his, and he'd never been in any city other than Minneapolis, with his guitar in one hand and his thumb. It was standing like this. And the snow was falling. It was in April, so it was big snowfall, big snow. It was a warm night. It wasn't a cold Minnesota storm. And on his way to Madison, I hear from Madison. Then he goes to Chicago. He plays there, and they're beginning to be the smell of these folk clubs, something totally new. In Madison, in Chicago, it's called the Gator Horn. And then I get this card a couple weeks later. It's a picture of Woody Guthrie with a cigarette hanging from an impossible angle, and a hat, a sailor's hat, and a rakish tilt, and his guitar. And on his guitar it says, "This machine kills fascists." So I turn the card over, and it says, "Dear Dave, I saw Woody. He likes my stuff. Signed, Bob." And on the bottom it says, "This card kills fascists." So then he goes and he's there, and there's this family, this leftist family is coming, red diaper baby, red coming, who take care of him, but bring him cigarettes. That's most what he needs. You can still, in those days you could smoke in the hospital. And bring him cigarettes, that's what he needs. So he was my general. And they come there, and there's this kid sitting on a chair with his guitar next to it. "What's this? That never happened before. What's this?" And "This is Minnesota," whatever, I can almost imagine the scene. And they say, "What?" And they take him home to East Orange, New Jersey. The father is a labor union with the Longshoremen's Union. Well, I'm getting into too much detail, but you got to anyway. But his kid plays guitar, and is an incipient folk singer, who's the same age as Bob, and he brings him to Greenwich Village. And there's set up these. They just started up a new thing, the Cafe Wa, and these cafes where you could go and play music. This is just a very new thing. This is 1961, where you could play music and take a collection, and the tourists would come in to see a real bohemian atmosphere, blah blah, and so on. They even had something called Rent a Beatnik back then, where if you had a party, you could rent beatniks to come and be beatniks at your party. It was kind of like that. And anyway, it was like, so the rest is history, herstory, and hipstery. And that's, if you got any questions, I might have some answers. Any answers, might have some questions.